I have to get going. I'm late from a meeting and I've got another meeting immediately after this. Like I said at the beginning of the last three or four episodes, it's tough being mayor, and ohmTown is very demanding. That said, thanks for coming. If you are here in chat, if you're not here in chat, you're probably going to come in late. That's because I didn't spring this up until late. I'm gonna leave all of this in the podcast. So thanks for coming. I'm Mayor Watt. I'm the mayor of ohmTown. ohmTown is that site right there, but I stream here on Twitch, and I'm looking at ohmTown on Twitter. I didn't even tweet this out. YouTube. There's a Discord. There's not much content on there isn't any content on the Discord, but there are channels for each channel in ohmTown. At any rate, I am kind of running ragged. So I'm going to go through today's episode and today's news. I already picked out 20 or so articles. And we're starting out with a big hit here. And by big hit, I mean nobody really likes talking about it, but it's a reality of our existence. It says corporate America. This is in the Mobile channel, by the way. Corporate America doesn't want to talk abortion, but it may have to. And I'm going to click the link and just get into the news today. This is an article by Emma Goldberg, Alicia Haridasani, Gupta, and Lauren Hirsch. And I'm just going to say my perspective on this, but you can go and read the article. And they talk about this Roe v. Wade Supreme Court issue in the context of corporations. Okay, it talks about they mentioned OkCupid, a dating service, wrote on Twitter on Tuesday that overturning Roe v. Wade would be unacceptable. They talk about Fortune 500 companies and Disney and Don't Say Gay and all of this other stuff. And my problem here is that we are a country of people that happen to fall into particular cohorts of organizational units called corporations. But corporations don't speak for me. Corporations shouldn't speak for me. Corporations should stay the heck out of politics. And they can facilitate designing policy, but government is supposed to be maintaining society at a healthy level and making sure that corporations don't abuse the citizenry, and that citizens don't abuse other citizens. That's why we have a criminal code. That's why we have corporate law. That's why we have a framework. But the problem here is corporations are being impacted by corporations are coming up against, and have always been, seemingly in the modern times, impacted by political discourse. For instance, in Florida right now, this Don't Say Gay bill, it's a political policy in place by a select few that are going to impact. Oh, hello, Dreadnought. So these policies that are being put in place are sometimes crafted by corporations, and I feel that corporations need to stay the hell out of politics. And I despise the idea. I despise the idea that nearly unlimited funds are going from corporations into political parties, because they don't represent the population. They don't even represent the population that's within the corporation. They represent the corporate aspirations for one thing or another. It's always a means to an end to get policy in place so that the corporation can benefit from this tweaking of politics. Yet it's the people, um, it's the people that are being impacted. And so I want corporations out of politics so that the people can represent the people and not financial interests within corporations, because all of that wealth is just moving towards the top. And you can see that based on the income inequality between the executive suite, even administrators within a corporation, and the quote unquote working class. And it's a real shame that this is even being brought up. I think it's the other way around. Corporate America doesn't want to talk about abortion, and they shouldn't, and they should stay the hell out of it. And nobody should be encouraging corporations to engage in that discourse. And again, my stream just bows out for a moment. I'll have to look into it and figure out what's going on. And so, hey, Dreadnought, and you say it's the same in the oil industry, using money to influence policy. Yeah, I mean, the oil industry, and whenever you talk about a sector like that, you're really talking about corporations. It is the corporations that are deciding the fate. And they're doing it with a particular bias to seek profits. And even that is the antithesis of what human society is. Corporations are a byproduct. They shouldn't be the ruling class of society. But here we are. In fact, the very wealthy create trusts and corporations to shelter personal assets because they funnel it into it, and then they siphon a draw from it, and it's seemingly protected. And if corporations, if government wanted to, they could pierce the veil pretty regularly, based on this injection and siphoning of wealth from corporations into private hands. But it's a very complex matter. It's a long tail litigation. It's forensic analysis. It's all of this other stuff that I don't even want to get into. But the fact is, my perspective is that corporations should not be involved in politics. Yes, they can craft certain policy, but it really shouldn't be the corporate America talking about it. It should be the people, and that's why government exists. And somewhere along the line, we failed to hinder corporations the same way that the Federalist Papers hindered government from impacting corporations and impacting the citizen. Our entire Constitution is built around the idea in the United States. Our Constitution in the United States is built around the idea of throttling government from hindering business. And we've included people in it, basically. Even though it says, we the people. It's actually a burden on stopping the government from hindering business. That's how we ended up with everything else. I mean, from slavery to income inequality, we have it because there were brakes on certain things, trying to prevent others from hindering business. And now, we're finally trying to break through all of these barriers. But I'd say we still have 100 years to go before we even see equality and opportunity based on something as overt as race alone. But now these personal issues like abortion, for crying out loud, nobody just go, well, I mean, if you're a sociopath, then you're going to go charging in there every time you're pregnant and have an abortion. Sure. And you're going to be completely disconnected from the act, but people struggle with this every time. It isn't something that people do, as I'm going to go get a latte. The psychological impact of making this decision lasts a lifetime, or more. I mean, this trauma of having to do this goes beyond the person. And for whatever reason, the same people that are saying you can't do this with your body are the same people that are saying don't tell me what to do with my body. Ta-da! How do you have the cognitive dissonance to do this? And like Dreadnought says, I think this is a woman's decision. Yeah, I do too. I don't think that there should be communication between the two parties that are involved in this. Because it wasn't done by spontaneous combustion, right? It didn't just appear. But ultimately, the only person that has to make a decision is the woman. Because I guarantee you, if men were the ones that had this ability to bring a child into this world, this would be so far codified into the law that it would never be removed from being an option for men. But here, a woman's involved, and suddenly it's a you can't, and the government is taking this rule away by a bunch of people within it that are saying that your existence doesn't matter. It's the fact that I'm gonna stop you from doing something that I don't like. And so a select few, a very small few that are just loud, are making this happen. So I can't get into this too long. So I'm gonna have to keep on going. Let's keep on going. So that's just one. Here, and I'll put it in chat. This is just one news article, and there isn't a lot of it in today's stream, but they just happen to have been coming fast and furious, because it really is the preeminent thought right now in American culture is Roe v. Wade has been in existence for 40 years, and now it's being in a backroom, closed door fraction of the Supreme Court, politicized all to hell decision that was written out. Now, there's good and bad in this. The good is that we have 40 years of processes in law, and we will be able to leverage all of that, and we being the people who oppose the overturning of Roe v. Wade and Casey. I believe that we now have additional information that we can leverage in solidifying and codifying a future Roe v. Wade. But it will take 10 years for it to come up to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court doesn't have to decide to make a decision on it. But the states are going to end up fighting to bring something to the Supreme Court so that it can be codified. And so you will see what happens with this. This here just kind of drives home my point. Leak on Roe v. Wade heightens the perception of a politicized Supreme Court. The last two justices were a joke and shouldn't have been, well, not the last two. The previous two were highly politicized. Neither one of them were suited to be a Supreme Court justice, in my opinion. One was screaming that he likes beer, and the other one is some pretty, to me, questionable history. And there are 5 of the judges that have said that they would not overturn Roe v. Wade and that they don't have any aspirations to do it. And bam, instantly, the moment. And all of this while at the same time politicians are screaming, and it's kind of the wingnut politicians that are sitting there screaming that the Democrats are going to just take and take if they have power. No, they're not taking anything. They're giving more and more opportunity, equity, and equality to more people, and not really taking away anything from anybody. Because if you look at the states that are consuming a lot of the entitlement programs, you'll see where it is. I'll just leave it that way. That way we can keep on moving forward. So Dreadnought, you said you feel American law courts are confusing. They seem almost chaotic. Yeah, there's a lot of, well, I'd say that law and courts, there's an attempt to align it to particular frameworks. And so you have like minimums and maximums in certain things. But it's really your affinity to the law. Somebody might interpret what you are doing as being horrendous and they'll throw the book at you depending on which state you're in. And that's all about that. It's the particular culture of that court. Because you do want some fidelity, you do want to be able to leverage things in a certain way so that it isn't just standardized, like the 3 strikes rule. It's absurd to be a 3 strikes and quote unquote, you're out. Because the context of the crime really matters, whatever it is. There's a big difference between, well, you only murdered 100 people once, so it's okay. But if you get caught dealing drugs 3 times, suddenly you're a lifer in prison. And it doesn't make any sense. So, and that's really the absurdity of what the court is. And by court, I mean the legal system. You could be in one state and be absolutely crushed by the law, but California is pretty chill about pot. So it says, so Dreadnought says there should be the same law sentencing across all states, in my opinion. Yeah, that, to me, it makes sense too. We're federally, it's supposed to be that way, but each state has its own laws because it's its own wannabe culture. The polar opposites in law and in culture between Florida in the United States and California in the United States couldn't be, they've got the same weather, sans hurricanes, but everything is pretty normal, and maybe every once in a while it rains, but there's different laws that are applied, and you can get completely ruined if you are overtly your political aspirations in Florida are going to be limited, and you're going to be doing an uphill battle depending on which political alignment you are. And the law applies the same way. Depending on how you come across, it's going to be leveraged harder against you than somebody who has that same ideological bent. Very weird, but it's because it's made up of those humans that I keep talking about. It can be. I got a ticket once going through a state where the person, the hotel that I ended up staying at, I had put my ticket down on the table because I had just received it and I was really tired. I'm like, okay, that's it. And I put my ticket down on the table. The dude saw the ticket, didn't even, and it was face down. You couldn't tell who I was or anything. And he goes, "You're from California, huh?" And I'm like, "Yep." And he goes, "Yeah, the cop on the hill pulls everybody over from California." So he had a 1 in 50 chance, and he was right. So let's click this link and we'll keep on moving through. Sorry. So this here is an article over at the New York Times. Sean Hubler, I think it is. It might be Hubler, and Michael Wines is the author. And so this leak, it's a first draft that was leaked there from February, and there were many others apparently, I'm sure, that had been going back and forth. But somebody, we don't know who yet, essentially leaked a private vote. This wasn't publicly discussed. And I was reminded that the Supreme Court is not supposed to take into account the public's opinion. What they do is review the law, and it's supposed to be done largely in a vacuum of that law, and not political discourse. Except for the last 40 years, there hasn't been any issues with this. There might have been talking about it, but nobody has drafted anything together as an opinion to come out of. Yes. So Dreadnought asks, Supreme Court is meant to be the highest / final say on cases in law. Largely, yes, but there's no final say ultimately until your case is heard and has gone through the legal processes, ultimately ending up a case that is heard in lower courts, matriculates through the courts and ends up in the Supreme Court if upon appeal after perceived injustice, they end up at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, well, based on the historical context, and they go deeper into the lore of the law and the intent of the law. And then they make a decision, either supporting or remanding the outcome of a particular, a particular set of facts, and then they'll kick it back down and say, sorry, it's up to the states to decide, or this is basically a federal opinion. So, and that's how it works. That's how a case ends up in the Supreme Court. That said, it says an overwhelming majority of adults, 84%, said the justices should keep their political views out of the judicial decision, but only 16% of that group felt the court did a good job or excellent job at it. And it says, over the past 3 years, Pew found approval of the court had declined 15 percentage points, reaching its least positive rating in nearly 4 decades. Oh, interesting timing. Considering the fact that out of the last 3, the last one ended up being, she's still pending because the judge that is the Supreme Court justice that is still there hasn't left yet. But Kavanaugh, and I can't remember her other name right now. I'm really distracted because I've got 5 monitors in front of me, and then an iPad as well. And as mayor, I can't turn off for this. But anyway, and I'm getting pinged. So like kind of death by 1,000 cuts. But anyway, you know, when somebody has really overt religious leanings, and then another person is screaming that they like beer while they're being interviewed, seems like an odd juxtaposition in a country where we have separation of church and state, and we don't really suggest to employees of any enterprise, hey, let's talk about beer in a forceful, almost passionate, I'm going to cry in my seat because I love beer sort of way. But that is what happened. So I can't imagine why, you know, if the sarcasm isn't real here, I'm not surprised that the Supreme Court is not being found in high regard. And it's because it's been poison pilled. The history of the court has been to the public largely that it's a respectable estate. It's a respectable pillar of society, and only as things have become more vitriolic, hyperbolic, and just outrageous and politically and religiously charged, it has declined in its integrity in the perception of the public. Well, here we go. So I'm not surprised. But go over to New York Times and read more about this, because my summary of it really won't ever do it justice. There just isn't enough time for a show like this. So let's continue on. I saw this one coming from a mile away because I was actually approached regarding this concept, and I nearly lost my mind with the person who came to me talking about it. This is in the Hatch Ideas channel. Law firm says employees can work from home full time, but only if they take a 20% cut. The argument then, when I was approached, was, well, I'm paying for people to come to the office, not necessarily sit at home and do the job. And I said, well, you're paying people to do the job. You're not paying them for transit time. That would absolutely be ridiculous. Nobody nobody says, hey, here's what I'm paying you, and 20% of that is aligned with you showing up for work. Because the expectation it was then that you would show up to work. But we have seen over the last 2 years that a large number of white collar workers can do their work remotely. And there's no impact on performance. They're actually better because they're happier. They don't have to spend hours on the road and waste gas and additional costs to the vehicles that they drive. And here we are. But this is in the CNBC. This is on CNBC.com. Vicky McKeever is the author of the article. And normally what happens is an employee works for a salary, and that is what they get paid to produce that work product, whatever it is that they're assigned to do. Nowhere in there is funds for transportation. It is to do the job. Now, if a person is doing something for the business, then they get travel time, and money compensates them, right? They get a stipend to go to a site. This is done on the regular. You have expense reports because of that. But now they're saying, well, your salary is incumbent upon you coming into the office. Can't include transport. So Dreadnought says, can't include transport as it's done before anyone clocks in. Yeah. Well, salary, there is no, for those of us who are salaried, we work 24 hours a day, basically as needed to complete the job. And it's incumbent on us to decide what our work-life balance is. So there were times in my life where I'm working 100-hour work weeks. And when you are paid for 40 hours worth of work to get X done, you either maximize that and you say, no, I'm clocking in and out, or you pull 100-hour work weeks and you almost quarter the amount or third the amount of time or money that you get compensated by per hour. So yeah, it can be an interesting thing to compel yourself to work 100-hour work weeks when you're actually only getting paid for 40 hours or 35 hours. Really depends on where you work. But in this particular case, they're saying, hey, you're getting paid $100,000, but I'm only going to pay you 80 if you stay at home. And then in reality, you're not getting paid 80 because taxes take out a huge chunk. So that's always a misperception of people. Somebody makes $100,000. That's not what they take home. But we disconnect from it until somebody says what I just said. Taxes take away a big chunk, and only if you manage to do it right can you lower your taxable income below somewhere around 12.5% or 25%. Some people are taxed 33%, and even then it depends on which country you're in. So they're talking about this. According to the Stevenson Harwood website, employees joining the firm, that's who's talking about this, on its training contract in London are paid £43,000 or $54,000 for their first year, and then it rises. And now they're arguing that, well, you're not traveling, so we're going to require you to take a 20% pay cut. And if you don't do it, then you have to show up. And if you don't want to do either of those things, then you have to find a new job. So I find that always really interesting, particularly when it's retroactive. Like the next time your pay is coming out, you have to make a decision, either show up or get a 20% pay cut. I think it's rather disgusting, but I'm not a millionaire running a law firm. But it would set precedent. If other people see this as actually happening, others can do it too and put some downward pressure on employees, which we're already suffering as employees because we're not getting the combined might of a bunch of workers producing some product and billing other people. And then I get that draw, right? We're working for 35 to 40 hours a week. And suddenly somebody is saying, we're going to take some of your pay. Oh, and by the way, inflation is at an all-time high over the last 20 years, actually closer to 40 years. And yeah, you have no option. Go find another job if you don't like what we're about to do. It's a shock to the system. Yeah. Yeah, and if a person has medical conditions, it could be a safety issue with the pandemic. Yeah. And I know from my interactions over the last 2 years that it has been a steady state of requests regarding staying at home because of the pandemic. So if you have a compromised immune system, then you're at risk, and you have to justify your existence with HR about it. So this here is in the stock marketeers. Let's go on to the next one. Do I owe self-employment taxes if I'm a member of a limited liability company? I can answer this. They go into greater detail in Market Watch from a person referring themselves to as the tax guy. Do I owe self-employment taxes if I'm a member of a limited liability company? Yes. Regardless, really, the limited liability company has to, if you're a principal and it's a single entity, and you're disregarded, then you're going to end up having to pay. Regardless, somebody has to pay self-employment tax. So they go into greater detail and add a little bit of context to it. But let's see. I'm sure that they're going to talk about all of this. But like I say every episode, I don't pre-read any of this stuff. Now, this applies only to the US. In other countries, it may or may not apply similarly. So you'll have to get somebody that talks about it from your particular perspective. So again, context matters. And so it says, probably up here at the top, let's see here, so-called disregarded SMLLCs, which is a single member, owned by you. Essentially, if your company makes money and you are the principal member of the LLC and you draw money, then you're going to have self-employment tax. But it's all based on the value of your income. So the revenue generated, etc., and what your draw is. So there is tax regardless. So the key here is don't make any money. That's why businesses exist, right? So that you don't have to pay taxes. Never mind. Let's move on to the next article. This is in the Hatch Ideas channel. Uber lost almost $6 billion in the first quarter as shares of Asian ride-hauling agents Didi and Grab tanked. So Uber posted $6 billion in losses for the first quarter due to its investments in Didi and Grab. Shares of the two Asian ride-hailing giants have plunged since they were listed in the U.S. last year. Overall, Uber's performance is up from a year ago, with bookings up 35% to $26.4 billion. So how would you like to be able to lose $6 billion in the first quarter but still have a 35% increase year over year? Not bad. What's really funny about this is they are almost, depending on, wow, I have so many articles still to go through because I got on my soapbox. Anyway, this is a Business Insider article, and it's by Huiling Tan. And I think that it's a really interesting concept, basically getting in strangers' cars. All of us, somebody might try and call me a boomer, but I'm not. But comparatively, us olds still remember a time where we were told not to get into strangers' cars. But the counter argument that I got a long time ago was, well, they're not really strangers. You're calling them and you know who and what they are. And I'm like, well, no, not really. I've watched plenty of videos where somebody has gotten into an Uber or some other ride sharing service and found out that that person wasn't really an Uber. or it wasn't the person that they were expecting to pick up one way or the other. Sure, it's rare, it's seemingly rare that something bad happens, but maybe we just don't really hear about it because it's not on our radar. But 6% or sorry, $6 billion in first quarter losses still seems like a lot. And in this day and age of COVID, I'm surprised that it's not more. And on the other side of this, what I had started to say was once automated driving vehicles are in mainstream, Uber will phase out people because then the rides are more cost effective because you're not paying a human being anything. It's all coming into the company. Sure, the outset of it, the initial investment is going to be high, but it'll be augmented by human drivers trying to get some money while they still can. So automated driving is going to take Uber jobs. And there won't be anybody but the company to rail against. And by company, I mean the people, the CEO. I think they already put in an order for something like 10,000 self-driving cars or 100,000 self-driving cars. Let me see. I don't normally do this on the stream, but yeah, maybe they. Yeah, so Uber in 2020 dropped their self-driving car division. Probably watching the writing on the wall as the pandemic is rolling through. So who knows? Maybe it was just good timing because 2020 really wasn't. Well, it was the end of 2020. So yeah, they killed it because of costs. Okay, so let's continue on. This is in the Marble channel, and the myth of the genius tech inventor. We idolize founders with brilliant ideas, but triumph often results from business savvy combined with imagination. So let's click this link. And it's over at the New York Times. It's written by Shira Ovid. And it says, it's practically an insult in Silicon Valley to say that an executive is extremely capable at running a company. Inventors, not great managers, are often the ones celebrated in technology, which is really interesting because the flip side in business exists. It isn't about the idea. It isn't about, anything other than execution. If you don't do it, then you have nothing. Nothing exists. The idea alone doesn't matter. It's executing on the idea. Spinning up the business doesn't matter. It's executing the business. It's actually doing. And so you'll hear in business that people are discounted all the time for being the idea guy or doing something that streamlines. It is discounted and summarily dismissed depending on who you're talking to, because the only thing that matters is doing it, selling it. So it says right off the gate, that inventors, not great managers, are often the ones celebrated in technology. I think that there are a few that are hyped, but that's not necessarily true. That the inventor is hyped, even in technology. It's the business people are reinforcing the idea of business acumen, not technical sophistication, because a great idea that never gets sold is worthless, really. Then you find somebody that buys it out. Great ideas are almost never enough on their own. There's another paragraph in here. Strong leaders also need pragmatism and other skills beyond dreaming. There you go. See, there's the diminishment of the idea person. And the way that technology is infusing everything now means that the myth of the genius tech inventor is standing in the way of progress. Again, blasting the idea that a person that comes up with the idea that ultimately becomes manifest in a business is worthless. It's just a byproduct of business, even before the business kicks off. So the author of this article says, I've been thinking of this because I started reading my colleague Trip Mickle's new book, which explores the tensions between Apple's head and its heart in the decades since Jobs died. Apple's chief executive Tim Cook is the head, the whiz at manufacturing details. Johnny Ive is the design genius heart, who helped Jobs make computers fun and shaped a modern smartphone. And Johnny Ive stopped working at Apple full-time in 2019, and in Tripp's telling, complained that technocrats and accountants were sucking Apple of its soul. But that has always been, I can tell you that for decades, I would say since the dawning of a creative bouncing off of a business person, this conflict has always existed, because the artistic aspect of a product usually costs because if you are brutalist in your design, it may not appeal to customers as much as an artistic piece that's well designed with human interface in mind. But it's expensive to do that kind of stuff because you have to do a lot of testing to make sure there's form and function and fit. Well, if you keep on demanding 30% margins, you're going to end up with a conflict between the artists within the enterprise versus the MBAs. Even though the artists can fully account for things in terms of time and manufacturing costs, but for whatever reason, there is this always this conflict. So go over to this New York Times article. It's a longer form article, The Myth of the Genius Tech Inventor. So the next article is in the Hatch Ideas channel, and it is why McDonald's got rid of the snack wrap and why it's not coming back anytime soon. McDonald's cut the snack wraps from the menus because they were too complicated to make. And this is something that I've spoken about, not this particular thing, but the fact that time and resources and the system involved in creating something, if it isn't cost effective for a business, if it isn't leaning on the strategic advantage of the enterprise, you have to nix it, because you can't get time back, and time almost always relates to revenue generation. We report things on the quarter, we report things on the month, we report things day by day and week by week sometimes. Well, this article is over at businessinsider.com and is written by Mary Meisenzahl, and really has kind of a scary picture. Heidi Klum prefers McDonald's is the picture, and it shows her jumping on a snack wrap. 3 of them, actually. Well, anyway, the snack wrap is simple: grilled or crispy chicken, lettuce, cheese, and sauce wrapped in a tortilla. As a product of the 2000, McDonald's initially promoted them with Heidi Klum after their 2006 launch. But according to this article, they are too much of a pain for the restaurants to make. And to me, it's just a different form of like a burrito or a taco. I mean, but compared to the processes that McDonald's has, let's see, Dreadnought says it takes skill to do wraps, need proper chefs. We're talking about McDonald's here. So McDonald's is pretty much form, it's function over form. That's how I should phrase it. It's function over form. So things are flash frozen, or they are shipped in depending on the process. They're shipped in the morning and they sell out by whenever they sell out, but there's never something frozen per se. Again, it depends on what it is within either the restaurant or the business, whatever. Well, if it's just an additional thing and only has a marginal return on your investment, then they're going to nix it. Well, if it's too much of a headache to build this thing, like you're intimating there, it takes skill to do wraps. Um, I don't know. People will argue with you about what a chef is. Um, but I agree. If it is a nightmare for consumers to eat, then they're not going to order it. And if it's a nightmare in production, then they're not leaning on their strategic, um, the benefit to the enterprise. So they're going to nix it. So if it's a big time consumer in production, they'll nix it. And so that's basically what happened. The snack wrap wasn't successful in part because it went up against the growth of other healthy food fast food chains like Panera and Chipotle. It also had the bad luck of going head to head against the highly popular all-day breakfast. Wraps and continuing breakfast after 10:30 both added complexity to the kitchens that made service slower. There you go. And one had to go, and that was it. Problem is the test kitchen is proper chefs, but the staff serving have little or no training. Yeah. Because the expectation for the franchisee is that the processes have been maximized. So there's fewer hands touching it, it's expedited in its creation, and it is that test kitchen that is supposed to design this workflow and get them in and out. That was the whole reason why fast food even blew up, is because McDonald's and others optimized the kitchen process. I can't remember the person's name that actually hit it off, but you can look it up. Not you in particular, Dreadnought. You probably have seen documentaries and writing about this and had discussions about it with somebody that finds it equally interesting. That it used to be a really slow process in kitchens, restaurant kitchens, and so you ended up with slow food, and then you ended up with a couple of people that said, hey, we need to speed it up. And that's how you ended up with fast food, because they've optimized the kitchen. The food and stuff like that is pre-prepped either in that morning or frozen the previous days. But either way, that workflow is what matters. And if you have a slow delivery time out the window, or at the counter, you're done. You might as well get rid of it and just have a conventional restaurant. These used to be the same model as a factory line. Yeah. One person does something and passes it to the next and down the line. Exactly. Meanwhile, there might be some other area that is doing other production and then throwing it onto that table for people to just move it down the line. Yep. Fast and Furious. It's not just a movie. So the next article is Social Determinants of Health, Technology, Examples in Healthcare Trends in 2021. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to speed along because I do have a couple of appointments and something that I have to address as soon as possible here. So let me click this link. We'll take us over to Business Insider, and it's Insider Intelligence. And this is one of the articles where if you are a part of the Insider Intelligence program, then you can get greater information. But it says the coronavirus pandemic afflicted the U.S. healthcare industry at a time when it was already experiencing rising rates of chronic disease, doctor burnout, and staff shortages. But it especially took a toll on some of the most vulnerable at-risk communities across the country. So COVID basically overwhelmed the medical services industry, and people were getting paid considerably more during this pandemic. It says, while care received in medical facilities can account for approximately 10 to 20% of health outcomes, the remaining 80 to 90 can be attributed to SDOH. So, social determinants of health. People don't go and get health care because they can't afford it. They can't get to it. It's largely expensive, and other things put pressure on going and getting health care. So if prices are increasing and nobody's leaning on technology, you end up with people flooding into the emergency department. And we used to call it an emergency room, but now it's a full department. And so it says, in response to various SDOH trends and imbalances, digital health vendors have jumped at the opportunity to unite healthcare stakeholders with the tools needed to tackle SDOH. Healthcare organizations are providing support services, coordinating with community organizations, and offering health risk assessments. And so you have these little pop-up things now here in the States, where a hospital will pop something up so that people can get medical, I guess, a cursory look to see if the treatment needs to be more involved. Particularly for vaccinations, they'll pop up vaccination sites, and you go and get a vaccine, and then you go see your regular doctor whenever. But now telehealth is skyrocketing. I can set up an appointment with my doctor via a web browser, activate my webcam, and be seen all the way up to sitting there showing my tonsils in the camera. Odd, I know, but if it makes things more efficient and effective, then so be it. But here in the States, you still have to pay a copay sometimes. So they go into other things about technology involving SDOH, so social determinants of healthcare. So let's continue on. Yeah, I have way too many. Oh my goodness. So city downgrades Tupperware, says it stayed too long at the party, so to speak. This is in the Hatch Ideas channel. I'm just going to click the link and I'll include it in the show notes, but I've got to hurry. So this is a Samantha Subin article, and it says that city downgrades Tupperware. Well, hate to break it to Tupperware. This isn't that much of an article. I'm going to have to do something with CNBC in my aggregator. But anyway, my concern with Tupperware really is the fact that we are finding microplastics in all of our food. And so the reason why I even bothered clicking on this was to draw home that point. We have, or I should say I have, serious concerns about the infusion of microplastics. We are finding it in food, in animals, and then we butcher the animals and consume them, and it's in us, and we get it because we're drinking something and it has microplastics in it because microplastics have somehow found their way into the food chain, and we find it in our in our muscles, in our lungs, in liver, all throughout our body. We are finding microplastics. So let's continue on. This is in the Mobile channel. China's COVID lockdowns leave millions out of work. Yes, that's going to continue to happen. And China is very aggressive in shutting things down, locking people literally in their houses. I've seen videos where they're being bolted into their house. Migrant workers and recent college graduates have been hit hardest by shuttering factories, closing construction sites, and anemic job market. Yeah, I think what's going to end up happening in China is automation is going to continue to ramp up, but I make that comment pretty regularly. Let's continue on. The next article is over in the Continuity Report, and it's about Rotten Tomatoes is wrong about Top Gun. And I'm going to click the link so that we can go over to it. So this Rotten Tomatoes article, yeah, and they're extreme. So Dreadnought says they need to look at being tough after causing this. We truly don't know the source of this, other than it came from Wuhan, because that's where we traced it to. The form of it, depending on who you agree with, is questionable as well. There just happens to be a massive virology research institute there, and suddenly this pops up at a wet market just outside of it. I don't like being conspiratorial, but man, that is a creepy coincidence, isn't it? Well, at any rate, they literally they force vaccination in many places, and they bolt people into their houses during a vaccine lockdown. So it's it's pretty intense there. Yeah, I mean it's a coronavirus, so there's let's just say a lot of questioning as to how this thing came into existence. Um, but I hazard to say that scientists are naming anything. Depending on who you talk to, they say that it's a naturally occurring thing. Um, so anyway, we feel the need for speed as we gear up for Top Gun Maverick. And so it says here, Rotten Tomatoes has it wrong. It says Rotten Tomatoes is wrong about Top Gun. And they go into some detail about this. For a movie that had as much pop culture impact as 1986's Top Gun did, it's kind of amazing that it has remained a one-off for all these years. You had the blossoming superstar talents of a young Tom Cruise and young Val Kilmer, director Tony Scott breaking into the mainstream with the help of producer Jerry Bruckheimer, and expertly crafted action scenes, the likes of which we had never quite seen before. And so now Top Gun Maverick is hitting the movie screens. But I just don't see a lot of people going out to movies. I think 2.5 years of pandemic, I think some people are going to go out regardless, but I think people are kind of tired of going out to big venues, particularly with the pandemic still sitting around us. So let me hurry up. I'm going to continue on. Go check out that Rotten Tomatoes article, and maybe when you go and see Top Gun, you can come back and chat with me about it. The next article is over in Mobile. Quantum mechanics could explain why DNA spontaneously mutate. So the molecules of life, DNA, replicate with astounding precision, yet this process is not immune to mistakes and can lead to mutations. Using sophisticated computer modeling, a team of scientists at University of Surrey have shown that such errors in copying can arise due to strange rules of quantum world. This is probably one of the more difficult to process ideas, is that something as invisible as quantum mechanics can cause a disruption in DNA. So this is from University of Surrey. 2 strands of famous DNA double helix are linked together by subatomic particles called protons. The nuclei of atoms of hydrogen, which provide the glue that bonds molecules called bases together. These so-called hydrogen bonds are like the rungs of a twisted ladder that make up a double helix structure discovered in 1952 by James Watson and Francis Crick, based on the work of Rosalind Franklin and Maurice Wilkins. So ACTG is what makes up DNA. These bases are bonded together, and they're in previous iteration. I'd say generations, not just iterations, but generations. This would be referred to as genetic wobble, where something changes. But scientists are trying to figure out what causes that wobble, and it might be some quantum change. Let's see here. In a paper published this week in the journal Communications Physics, the Surrey team based in Leverhulme Quantum Biology Doctoral Training Center used an approach called open quantum systems to determine the physical mechanisms that might cause the protons to jump across between the DNA strands. But most intriguingly, it is thanks to a well-known yet almost magical quantum mechanism called tunneling, akin to a phantom passing through a solid wall, that they managed to get across. So depending on where the proton ends up, you might have some mutation. So this is starting to sound kind of X-many, X-many, X-people-y, superpowers. I'll just leave it there. So maybe at some point we'll be able to figure out what causes these mutations. And these mutations are the things that lead to things that could end up being cancerous or some other malady. And if we can figure out a way to stop it, then we make a healthier population. Wouldn't that be interesting? That we find out that protons are the reason why we eventually break down and die, let alone, give us superpowers. Maybe we can stop the wobble and we can evolve. Naturally is something that we've already done away with. So we as humans have kind of short-circuited the natural order of things where the strongest survive, right? So we have preemies like me who would never have made it into existence if not for science or force of will. Obviously, when you're an infant, a newborn, you don't necessarily have a inherent force of will that you can, make manifest. I've never asked a newborn, hey, are you strong enough? But science and technology has short-circuited the natural process. And we are longer living for it, arguably. You can't prove the negative. And we definitely have a better way of life. Arguably, again, there are people that say that we need to go back to yesteryear when we surprisingly barely lived to 35, but everybody seems to be hunky-dory on it. Yeah, well, yeah. I don't know if I'm gonna, do you want me to read that? um, is that how you got your name, Dreadnought? Your real name, Oops? Is that? Okay, so the next article is a new study reveals the effect of extended spaceflight on astronauts' brains. There were twins that one was sent into space and one stayed on Earth. And when the spaceman returned, he was actually frailer and had less bone density. And this is like a gravity thing. Here on Earth, you're exercising all the time, like it or not, because you're carrying your weight around and you're bending and doing things with gravity pulling on you all the time. Whereas in space, you're in 0G, everything atrophies. Even with the running, you're really just in a contraption that pulls you to the treadmill while you're running. And it's not holistic, it's not everywhere. So really what you're doing is just barely maintaining your muscle mass. But extended stays in space actually do quite a bit of other things. So this is from the Oregon Health and Science University, and it's stored on phys.org, but my aggregator grabbed it and threw it in where Mobble. So the study published today in the journal Scientific Reports. These findings have important implications as we continue space exploration. It also forces you to think about some basic fundamental questions of science and how life evolved here on Earth. The research involved imaging the brains of 15 astronauts before and after extended tours of duty on the International Space Station, which Russia just bowed out of, by the way. They used MRI to measure perivascular space, or the space around blood vessels. I bet you it got bigger. Let's see. The vessels expanded, but I'm not sure. Let's see. Astronauts' images were compared to those taken of the same perivascular space in the brains of 16 Earthbound control subjects. And they found an increase in the perivascular spaces within the brains of first-time astronauts, but no difference among astronauts who previously served aboard the space station orbiting Earth. Interesting. So in all cases, scientists found no problems with balance or visual memories that might suggest neurological deficits among astronauts, despite the differences measured in the perivascular spaces of their brains. So experienced astronauts may have reached some kind of homeostasis. So if you keep going, wow. Yeah, I don't know if that's actually a good or a bad thing, but they didn't find anything negative overtly. So let's continue on. The next article is over in Hatch Ideas, and it's OPEC and others Seen likely to agree to another modest production increase after EU outlines Russian oil ban. And so oil producer group OPEC Plus, because there's others that are in alignment with OPEC. But it's basically a consortium of oil producing countries. On Thursday is seen to likely rubber stamp another small production increase. So this is what I was going for before, where I was saying that oil prices are increasing because of the Russian situation, but it's not like we're really hurting. But this conflict is very expedient in creating a situation where somebody can exploit that conflict for profit, and that's what this is. They could ramp up production to lower the cost down to $70 a barrel, even within their own economic forces of constraining it, and arguably saying, well, we're a bunch of oil producing countries, let's flood the market and lower the price, or just say, hey, let's lower the price and our margins will be smaller. But that's not what's happening. They're saying, well, let's keep the prices high, so that we can get as much money as possible, as if you can take it with you, or the long-term viability. The way I see it is, if you keep on doing this abusive tactic, and they're not really abusing anything yet. There are some people that are saying that oil is going to get into the $240 range over the next 3 years. I don't necessarily see that happening. I think that once you get into that range, you're going to force the hand of people to switch to other renewable energy sources, like solar, wind, nuclear, etc. When it's no longer cost effective to use oil, we'll switch. And that's kind of how it is. So they will open up the pipes more and deliver some fuel, deliver some oil. So much stuff comes from oil anyway. So this article is over at CNBC by Sam Meredith. And there you have it. OPEC could raise the production targets by 432,000 barrels a day for the next month. How nice. So let's go on to the next article, the word in tech. Watch a swarm of drones autonomously track a human through a dense forest. Back when I was working on one of my degrees, I did some research into using drones in a combat theater to track anybody that entered a certain range and track them long term over this range. And I'm surprised that they're talking about this kind of a thing, because the idea that I had was that it was a swarm of drones that covered a very large swath, and basically tracked a person going from where an IED is planted to every other location that they go to, so that you can basically increase safety of those in theater. Well, here we have this article, watch a swarm of drones autonomously track a human through a dense forest. And we'll click the link. It says it's a group of 10 small drones. So I'm not going to play the video. You can go over to The Verge and watch it. But this is an article by James Vincent. And it says, I hear the swarm a-comin', it's buzzing round the bend. Wow, he really leaned into that song, didn't he? Pardon me. Sorry about that. My voice is getting scratchy. So a group of 10 palm-sized drones communicate with one another to stay in formation, sharing data collected by onboard depth sensing cameras to map their surroundings. The method means that if the path in front of one drone is blocked, it can use information collected by its neighbors to plot a new route. And that's basically what I was doing with my research, but it was using not mini drones and not at their level. It was higher altitude drones to monitor the theater and use thermal imaging and whatnot, depending on the particular conditions. So But this is low level, and it's really interesting because it's speaking to me about the idea of intercommunication between devices so that you can get better results. Tracking research, research and recovery is one of the things that I'm really interested in. So search and rescue is really one of the things that I'm interested in. So this actually speaks to me, and they talk about natural disasters like earthquakes, floods. Swarm of drones can search, guide, and deliver emergency supplies to trapped people. And yes, I agree. This is great technology, and it's cheaper than the multi-million-dollar military drones that are out there. Anything networked is vulnerable to hackers, though, says Dreadnought. Yep. Yeah, that's why security can't be an afterthought. When you're creating something that is technology bound in something like this, um, your minimum viable product should have a component of security very high on the list of important issues. So yeah, any electronic device can be hacked if it has the ability to communicate. Um, yeah, and it can be hacked if it's captured. I could grab a drone and modify its firmware so that I can track it while it's flying around. Obviously, that downtime can tell people that it might have been adulterated in some way, but um, any pretty much any electronics can be hacked in some way. Anything can be hacked when you get right down to the word. But anyway, this is really interesting. I kind of dig it. So, but those little mini drones, they're getting more and more capable. We'll put it to you that way. These mini drones are going to be so capable that you're going to be able to have one sitting like a puppy or like a shoulder cat. It's like just sitting there, following you around wherever you are. It'll be my brain at some point in a jar, sitting in a mini drone flying around, doing a stream on Twitch. The buzzing from the fan might be annoying though. Okay, so the last I have two more articles. This one is the Word in Tech. Leak confirms flagship Sony headphone design casts doubt on improved battery life. Pictures of the apparent retail packaging for Sony's upcoming flagship headphone, the WH-1000XM5. That one rolls off your tongue there, doesn't it? Have leaked onto Reddit. That is unheard of. So that's what it's going to look like. It looks a lot like the Apple headset. And cast doubt on improved battery life. So this is an article by John Porter over at The Verge. Brushless motors equal silent fans. And the blade, though. The blade makes quite a bit of noise. Maybe they can design it so that it's silent. They'll get those Noctua fans. There you go. Noctua fans are pretty darn silent. Let's see here. So unfortunately, the new leak calls into question a previous report from Technic News, which claimed that the headphones would see improved battery life when used with active noise cancellation. Apparently, that's not going to necessarily happen. So I wonder, this picture actually I don't know the context of how this is being acquired and disclosed. Like if this was supposed to be really secret and somebody posted it somewhere and they shouldn't have, because that took me over to Imager, which could be a risky click. It looks like retail packaging and a retail purchase. So, and it's a person in a car. So I suppose nobody's going to get in trouble, but serial numbers can be tracked. But anyway, they look a lot like the Apple headset. So let's continue on to the last article. Is location data firm provides heat map of where abortion clinic visitors live. This is probably one of the more disgusting uses of technology. Placer.ai, a location data firm, offers access to multiple caches of data and heat maps on its website that shows users uh, shows, wait, it's a heat map on its website that show users where people visiting Planned Parenthood abortion clinics approximately live, raising concerns about the how that information can be used by anyone. It's absolutely disgusting. And internally, we are all bound by HIPAA regulations here in the United States. We can't disclose pretty much anything, from a name to a malady to anything, and we're supposed to anonymize it. Although it's fairly simple while still being sophisticated, but somebody in the know can de-anonymize anonymous data, depending on the quality of the anonymizing process. But at any rate, having the ability to track somebody from their Planned Parenthood office visit to where they live is just even approximately, this should not be allowed. The site should be shut down. The data firm should have to go through an ethics counseling session. You shouldn't be disclosing anybody's proclivity to any health concern. It's nobody else's business. And this obviously has some people riled up, and rightfully so. So it says Placer.ai only removed the ability to search for Planned Parenthood related data on its website after Motherboard contacted the company for comment on Wednesday. So obviously it was out there for a considerable amount of time that somebody told Motherboard about it, which is Tech by Vice, which is at vice.com. This article is written by Joseph Cox. And in light of what's going on with the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade and Casey, this obviously was out there and should never have been, because somebody could have been using it all the while, and will eventually harass these people that are seeking a medical procedure and having to cope with the medical issues associated with it. And without a doubt, it's nobody else's business but those people that are directly tied to this. It's the woman and or the man, or partner, or whatever you want to say, because you don't know the context, and you shouldn't. It's nobody else's business. So if somebody discovers a way to turn a person into a superhuman with flying abilities, fine. Contact me. That's great. But all of these other medical issues, it's nobody's business. So there you have it. Placer.ai sources its location data from having the developers of ordinary apps install the company's software development kit into their apps. And on its website, Placer.ai claims to have over 20 million active devices and its code in over 500 apps. Wi-Fi, GPS, beacons, and user motion all play a key part in determining accuracy. So if you have Placer AI stuff in your code, now you know what it's being used for. I'm sure amongst other things, but you can't go, this is just one thing. No, there's an ethical concern here. Nobody else should know. You wouldn't want your stuff disclosed to the world, even if you sit there and say, well, I'll never have an abortion. It doesn't matter. That's one person's issue. And then the next issue will be what? And the next issue will be what? You can't just pick and choose. You have to be a little bit more intellectually honest with the issues of modern human society. And this is just another issue. Plain and simple. With that in mind, leaving on that high note, right? I am all done with today's stream.